Alright guys, welcome back again to more Witch on the Holy Night. Even though we already completed the game, we still have some extra chapters we can look into. So, let's start that out. Alright, so I can backtrack to one later. I want to try out this one over here. The Honey Adventure. It's an extra. I believe it takes place after the... Or maybe not. I thought it took place after the game itself, but we'll find out. It had been 1 year since he'd moved into the city from his remote village. One thing he realized during that time is that likes and dislikes were the main difference between human and beast.
Hmm, ここが新しいアジトか。いいんじゃない？ちょっとみすぼらしいけど、周りに人間がいないのは綺麗でいいよね。
Okay, so this is before, I believe, chapter 8 or so. This is when he's just acclimating to life in the schoolhouse. The figure dressed in a white coat danced to and fro down the hallway. He was like a young woman in an old film enjoying herself window shopping. He was actually enjoying the atrocious sight of the school building in ruins.
そこ、あんまりはしゃがないの。何しろ築60年からの廃屋なんだから。
Oh, this is a lot earlier because Touko still has her glasses.
調子に乗ってるとバキッと床を踏み抜いて。
His mouth shut before he could even say to let him have his fun. Only one set of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Not a single feather's worth of his 70-pound body was exerting any force on the floor beneath him. It wasn't clear whether he was paying reverence to the hallway or simply excited by it. It's said that even walking through a grassy field, a beast is careful not to harm a single blade of grass. Apparently, this creature wrapped in a coat was no different. He was more a part of the environment itself than a settler of it. He had no regard beasts for greater or lesser than him, but when it came to his comrades, he at least displayed human-like or rather wolf-like clemency.
ま、相性はいいとプラスに考えましょう。街に出かけてくるけど、何か欲しいものはある？漫画とか小説とか。特にいりません。あ、帰りにハンバーガー買ってきてくれたら嬉しいな。パン生地がどっしりしてて、ハンバーグがギュッとしたやつがいい。まだおもちゃより食い気ときた。食事の調達方法も確保しないとダメみたいね。失敗したかな。ルームサービスのあるホテルの方が後々証拠は残らなそう。
Touko let out a defeated sigh. With her glasses on, she was restricted to her original way of speaking and gesturing. It was the beginning of December. Exactly 1 month had passed since they came to Misaki City. Until now, Touko had been attacking Misaki from a nearby neighborhood. Deciding it was time to get serious, she had moved her base of operations to this old school building.
何？ホテルの方が良かったの？そりゃあ楽だもの。グレードが良ければホテル暮らしは快適です。でもトウコさん、こういう廃墟好きだよね。え？そうかな？そうだよ。今回みたいなのは特にそう。趣味に走るとき、周りに人がいるの嫌がるじゃない。いろんなものに興味を持つくせに、興味を持たれるのは面倒っていうか。
Touko couldn't deny that observation. She had been under contract with him for 2 years, but it had only been about a year since he became her full-time bodyguard. He seemed to be able to see right through to the root of all problems that plagued Touko.
人混みは嫌いじゃないんだけどね。廃ビルでも廃工場でも、いっそ遊園地でもよかったのよ。でも、こんな田舎町じゃ君を連れているだけで噂になるでしょ。結果的にここに工房を構えるしかなかったの。ちゃんと人型になってるじゃん僕。別に目立たないと思うけどな。色合いの問題です。アジア系は無理にしても、せめてブルネットに化けてくれればいくらでもごまかせるんだけど。
Unfortunately, that wouldn't be happening. Simply being in human form at all was stressful for him. When he had to be human, his only condition was that he could look however he wanted. He was currently only in this form because they had to move from the town to the old school building. Once he found a classroom to sleep in, he'd be back to a wolf.
なんだって人型でいるのを嫌がるのかしらね。別に難しいわけじゃないんでしょ、それ。もともとアストラル体みたいなものなんだから、あなた。
Being an extremely versatile life form which required no body to stabilize him, in the physical world, his body could change according to the situation. Magecraft would have defined him as a higher dimensional life form with a materialized soul.
そりゃあ何の力もリスクもないけど、面倒なものは面倒だよ。人間だって無駄なことはしたくないでしょ。僕、人型になることに有利性を全く感じないし。
Apparently, he saw no value at all in his human form. That was exactly why Touko insisted he make his appearance blend in more, but the boy argued that if he had to be in an unnatural state, he'd at least make himself comfortable. To him, this was the only fun way to be a human, and he wasn't going to accept it any other way. And so, this was why he had taken on the appearance of a foreign aristocrat in a provincial Japanese city. Even his posh coat had been handpicked by Touko to satisfy one of his many demands.
じゃあ、お留守番お願いね、レオくん。来ないとは思うけど、もし人が来たら捕まえておいて。その際、足の一本ぐらいなら傷つけても OK だから。
And with that statement, Touko headed off into the city.
はーい、任されました。大丈夫。人間とかそもそも口に合わないし。こっちのことは気にせず、あのピリピリするお土産よろしくね。
Bale plopped down onto the desk after he saw his employer off. He morphed back into his wolf form.
ああ、退屈。世界中を回ってこんな田舎町が終着とか、拍子抜けもいいところ。
It had been 2 years since Bale met Touko Aozaki. After some deliberation with the werewolves, the mage was left in charge of Bale's education. Of course, his village had no real control over him. He didn't have to go with her. He decided to go simply because she seemed interesting. Touko stood before him in the cave where he stepped and asked,
え？生きている意味が知りたい？なんだ、そんなことで取引が成立するとはね。
She smiled and cut off her long locks of hair to seal their pact.
自由を知るには窮屈さを知っておかないとね。同じように生きている意味を知りたければ、まずは死ねないこだわりを見つけないと。そうだな。例えばの話。そいつを殺すまでは、とてもじゃないが死ねないほどの憎しみとか。
That hair was 20 years worth of Touko's life. In a way, her hair was a part of herself, but she parted with it easily. She was sure that Bale was worth the 20 years that had taken her to grow that hair. Bale too sensed that Touko was a creature of rare value. He was happy to have been selected by someone of her unusual talents, and, though she preached learning restraint, he observed that she was a truly free woman. And then, Bale accepted the terms of her contract and left his village. He took his first steps into the outside world. The first year was spent at Touko's workshop in England, learning basic knowledge. Namely, it was at a college of the Mage Association called Clock Tower. At the time, Touko had her own dedicated familiar. Formally speaking, this familiar was Bale's senior. But in that year's time, Bale proved himself superior and earned the right to travel the world with Touko. They rode on a train that collected mystic eyes, known as the Rail Zeppelin. They saw that Merkurake, an ancient giant octopus living in the North Sea. They explored the Bermuda Triangle, a place of no return connected to other realms. They met the remains of a mage of the Elder title, a league of ancients deep in Western Europe. All of their exploits were odd and exciting enough to hold his interest, and throughout them all, Bale felt he had been right to join Touko. This was certainly less boring than sleeping in his cave. But sweet honey makes one crave even sweeter poison. Having developed a taste for adventure, he now demanded even greater thrills. It was only natural that such an innocent creature would start to look forward to its next prey. The pinnacle of that desire rested on Touko's final goal. For all her liberty and aplomb, there was one prey she would not stop chasing until she caught it once and for all. With every new adventure, Beo would ask,
ねえ、これがトウコさんの殺したい相手？
However, the mage would always smile wryly and shake her head in response. Even this puppet master of extraordinary talent claimed that it was no easy task. Her target was in a realm far beyond anyone they'd dealt with so far, beyond human knowledge, perhaps beyond even Beo. But who could this mysterious person be, and how could they be so powerful? Beo couldn't help but be curious. Discovering that he was hired for magical reasons, he mustered a rare bit of fighting spirit thinking he'd found a worthy foe, but
冷静になって考えてみると、本物が偽物を相手にするとか大人げないかも。魔法なんて言っても、結局は人間の手によるものなんだし。
clearly it was still only interested in itself. It knew nothing of life or freedom. Its only pleasure was found in food. Bale didn't necessarily feel dissatisfied, but it was becoming harder to stave off his boredom. Also, since accompanying Touko on her adventures, his feelings toward her had become a bit confused.
トウコさん、あれでほんと一途だから。何でもできるのは僕と同じなのに、何にでも一生懸命になれるのって、ちょっと変だよね。
He slumped his shoulders exaggeratedly and closed his eyes. The golden wolf slipped off to sleep, not realizing that his feelings were in fact those of jealousy.
4年ぶりに帰ってきてみれば、住み慣れた町の面影はどこへやらか。駅前なんてもう別物だし、大手術にも程が。ああ、やっぱり角のタバコ屋さんなくなってる。ああ、自動販売機でタバコを買うのにもそろそろ慣れなくちゃいけないのかも。
Touko walked through her hometown for the first time in 4 years, grumbling to herself. She was on an aimless and careless stroll. No familiar escorted her, and she'd even left her self-defense bag back at the hideout. Today she was in full tourist mode, not nervous about a thing.
ここなんてあぜ道同然だったのに、今じゃ立派なストリートと来た。因果なものね。帰ってきたっていうのに、あっちに戻った時と同じ気持ちになってきた。
This was Touko's second time going back home. After leaving the Aozaki home 4 years ago, she'd secretly returned to Misaki. The first time was longer ago. When Touko was 14 years old, she studied abroad at an academy in England. She'd spent 2 years there before returning to Japan. Then she enrolled in a local high school named Rain Girls Academy and headed back to England 3 years later after graduating. That was 4 years ago. Now she felt the same as she did then when she returned to that English country town where she'd lived for 2 years.
寂しい？ちょっと違う。呆れてるとも違うし、怖がっているも近くて遠いような。
She rounded her shoulders and fell deep into thought. Touko felt a tingle run up her spine in a way that couldn't really be described in words. Times were changing faster than ever. Everything was relatively inexpensive and could be replaced on a whim. After thinking to herself for a bit, she cracked her knuckles and set forth. There was no use overthinking any of this. This is just how things were now. That's all there was to it. It was only natural for the old to make way for the new.
つまり、私の時代ってことだ。
You can do this, Touko. The sudden spark of self-enlightenment gave Touko the encouragement she needed, and she set off with high spirits toward the train station. Striding down the boulevard, she exuded the confidence of a supermodel or dictator. Although she was not about to exclaim, "My conquest begins with Main Street, time to tear it up." Her enthusiasm was, of course, still there. Touko, however, had something she had to accomplish first, before she could give thought to putting an end to the town's thoughtless attempts at modernization that would become outdated in just a few years.
Amai settingだ。こんな釘の絞りで客を煙に負けると思ったか?
Oh, so this is when she goes into the pachinko parlor and first meets Sojiro. Did they really think they could fool anyone with peg sets like this? Toko's first destination was not one Misaki's protective sigils, but rather her old favorite pachinko parlor. Though the area around the train station had undergone a dramatic makeover, the back streets were mostly unchanged. Touko had exchanged 5,000 yen for some little silver pachinko balls before going upstairs and sitting at the machine she determined was paying out the most that day.
そろそろ打ち止めかな。千両箱が12箱か。まあ、4年ぶりにしちゃ上等だろ。
She sounded slightly disappointed, but her lips and posture betrayed her good humor. Pachinko parlors were a staple form of entertainment in Japan, but they were largely absent in other countries. High-stakes game is criticized as inefficient, time-consuming, too luck-dependent, unrewarding, and so forth. Basically, a child's game. When Touko was studying abroad, she didn't see anything that even resembled a pachinko parlor. However, she wasn't here playing pachinko because she was feeling nostalgic for it after 5 years. She simply needed a war chest.
しかし、ヘリのチャーター代だけで足が出るとは。日本は平和すぎて、裏稼業の相場が高すぎるんだ、クソ。おかげで無一文だ。とりあえず、レオの食いぶちだけでも稼がにゃならん。
Touko had chartered a helicopter to airlift 3 shipping containers full of materials to remodel the old school building into a workshop. There weren't any roads a truck could take to get to the old school out deep in the mountains, so she had been forced to burn through the last of her savings.
お、37。こいつは本格的におしまいかな。まったく、こういうどうでもいいゲームだけは星の巡りがいいと来ている。
Her smile remained in spite of her complaints. There was nothing more Touko-esque than her sitting cross-legged in this pachinko parlor, one hand on the machine with the other holding a cheap cigarette. Touko noticed something out of the corner of her eye and put on her glasses to see better. She glanced over toward the odd sound she heard and saw a pale-faced parlor employee. He had a baby face and looked like he was still in high school. Upon seeing Touko, he froze for a moment and ran off. Or rather, he fled in a panic.
私、そんなに引く感じ?
Mage though she was, Touko was still in the prime of her youth. Though she didn't like it when guys ogled her or tried to strike up a conversation, she thought a boy running full tilt away from her was a bit much. Touko made a mental note to scare the crap out of that kid the next time she saw him and returned to her game. With her winning tickets in hand, Touko left the pachinko parlor. She had won quite a bit, but it was hard for her to feel good about it after what had happened at the end of her session. Wondering what that had been about, she looped around the back of the parlor to redeem her winnings for cash.
おや、Touko-sanじゃないですか。
She stopped in her tracks, frozen by a familiar voice she hadn't heard in 4 years. Bale's ears perked up as he woke from his slumber. It was just before sunset. He opened his eyes with a big yawn, sniffing at the familiar scent in the air getting closer.
よっと。
Bale jumped down to the floor and transformed back into his human form. Though he and Touko didn't have a strict master-servant relationship, he felt he should at least go and greet her since he was supposed to be watching over the place in her absence.
あれ?
Bale's face scrunched up into a perplexed frown as they met the hallway. He sensed something more to the smell he'd been so used to.
ただいま、レオくん。はい、真面目にお留守番していたお土産。
Touko handed the paper bag she was holding to Bale. Bale was happy to get his hands on the bag stuffed full of hamburgers, but he tilted his head at the lingering odd scent.
どうしたの？浮かない顔して。留守中何かあった？
いや、思わず寝ちゃうぐらい何もなかったけど、瞳子さんの方こそ何かあった？なんか元気ないし、妙に疲れてるし、何よりちゃんと僕の好きなお店のハンバーガー買ってきてるし。
え、そう？別に何もなかったけど。
This was all extremely suspicious. One of the major red flags for Bayo was Toko's usual complete lack of interest in food. Toko thought that a hamburger was the same no matter where you ate one, so she had often just stopped at wherever she was closest. Thus, Toko would only stop at a certain Asian burger chain still rare in Japan, maybe 1% of the time, not to mention.
いいじゃない。ちゃんと好きなお店のバーガーを買ってきたんだから。これは私なりのベオくんへの感謝の気持ち。今までいろいろ連れ回したけど、これからもよろしくね。
She had a sickly sweet smile on her face. If any of the puppets she had let loose in Misaki heard what she was saying right now, they'd probably fall into a logic error loop and self-destruct. Toko was not one to ever consider the rights of her familiars.
うさんくさい、芝居くさい、真っ向くさい。優しい瞳子さんなんて瞳子さんじゃない。いっつも周りを恨んでいて文句ばっかり言って幸せそうな人たちをめちゃくちゃにしたいんだけど大義名分がないから我慢してる。そんな理性のおかげでかろうじて性格破綻者を免れてる瞳子さんはどこ行ったのさ。
失礼しちゃうな。私だってたまには優しくなる時ぐらいあるんだから。ほら、4年ぶりに故郷に帰ってきたのよ。レオくんだって里に帰ったらちょっとぐらいホッとするでしょ。それと同じ。私だってホームシックになる程度の可愛らしさはあるんです。
すっごい嘘。月が涙を流すぐらい嘘。
本当です。もうレオくんそれ返して。罰として夕食抜き。
Toko made a grab for the paper bag, but Bale dodged and jumped out the window. He dexterously kicked off against the wall and scampered up onto the roof of the old school building.
なんだい、ほんとつまんない。言い訳する瞳子さんとか僕見たくない。
He pulled out a hamburger from the paper bag and took a bite out of it. That said, though her attitude had seemed like an act to Bayo, it was true that Toko was in an unusually good mood. It was unclear why that was the case, but Toko seemed to be feeling something special, or at least something she hadn't ever shown Bayo before.
なんだろう、あの匂い。妙にふわふわしてて、鬱陶しくて。
Bayo couldn't understand what exactly that feeling was. He only knew basic feelings such as like and dislike, delicious or disgusting. He wasn't able to articulate much further than that yet. I believe you're feeling jealous, sir.
まあいいけど、僕には関係ないし。瞳子さんも明日になればいつもの瞳子さんだろうし。
Bayo continued to eat through his hamburger, still not completely satisfied with the day's course of events. The truth was, even if Bayo didn't care enough to understand it, he was still a little upset that there was something he didn't know. A few days passed. Unbeknownst to the people of Misaki, progress was being made in the remodeling of the old school building. Meanwhile, Bayo was bored out of his mind knowing he had to be stuck here for at least another month. He could feel both his body and his mind dulling as he spent his days simply lounging around and eating meat. On the other hand,
買い出しに出てくるから、あとはよろしくね。元気してた？はい、お土産のローストビーフ。行ってきます。屋上の機材片付けておいてね。ただいま。今日もお留守番ご苦労様。よし、行ってくるでござる。お疲れー。 お酒臭い？ばっか。酔ってなんかないです。もう全然酔ってなんかないもん。
This is what Touko had become. The mage was constantly out and always in a good mood, in stark contrast to Bayo, who spent his days doing nothing. Evidently, she was happy with how her workshop was becoming more and more fortified by the day.
違う。もう絶対違う。そんなんでトウコさんの機嫌は良くなんないし、ここに関しちゃぐちぐち不満ばっかりこぼしてるし、何よりござるとかバカっぽいこと言わないし。
どうしたのベオくん？すっごく不細工な顔してるけど、そろそろ暴れたくて仕方がない？
そういう問題じゃありません。まあそりゃ早く本命とやらと戦ってみたいけど、もうちょっと先なんでしょ？ならけどなんか変。いつも下準備の時はこれぐらい暇だけど緊張感がない。毎日食べて寝て食べて寝てじゃ太る。ブクブクに太るよ。そんなのかっこよくないよ。
何言ってるんだか。ベオくんにそんな心配は無用でしょ。排泄もしないくせにまともな生き物ぶってるんじゃありません。
だから主にトウコさんがブクブクに。
ベオくん、それ本当？数値は変わってないはずだけど、なんかこうアストラル的に増えちゃったりしてる
This is what Bayo was talking about. Touko knew the accuracy of Bayo's eye and trusted his discerning vision over even the numbers on her scale. Normally, Touko would just remove her glasses and say something like,
唐突だが特攻兵器の有用性を確認したくなった。いや、意見は聞いていない。さあベオ、この首輪をつけてみろ。思いっきりハイに飛べるぞ。
but she hadn't done anything of the sort, and it was beyond weird for her.
別に増えてないよ。昨日とちょっとの上下差はあるけど、そんなの人間なら当たり前だし、いちいち本気にするとか見苦しいからやめてほしい。
本当？こう後でボテッとくるような気配とかない？
ないってば。昨日取った栄養分はきれいに分配されてるし、いつも通りのトウコさんだよ。
That last part was a lie. She was not the same Touko that Bayo had always known. Even though she was physically the same, there was something still odd about her since a few days ago. That strange, floaty, lingering scent was still there. It was a change that only a wild beast like Bayo could discern, but it was getting stronger with each passing day. Bayo was annoyed because he just could not figure out what that scent was.
それなら安心安心と。私は出かけてくるから、お留守番よろしくね。
Touko failed to notice Bayo's poor mood and left the old school building in her usual carefree mood. This is how it had been for days now. Bayo stared at his own reflection in the window and contemplated for a while. Unfortunately, this wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't change the fact that his employer was still acting strangely, and it wouldn't get rid of the uncertainty he was constantly feeling in his chest. He knew he didn't have much other
よ
choice.
し、トウコさんを尾行しよう。
Alright guys, I'm going to end the video here for today. Thank you all for watching. When we come back, we'll be continuing on in this extra chapter.